Hi everyone, welcome back to our Serpentine Twitch channel, and specifically today, our Synthetic Ecologies Live. I'm joined here with Seetal Solanki, materials translator, and Namita Patel, fermentation scientist. Namita and Seetal make part of our Synthetic Ecologies Guild that comprises of a range of cross-disciplinary thinkers, including Nadia Berenstein, Joshua Evans, Lucy Cheenan, Chiara Di Leone, I'm really sorry, Chiara, I always stuff your name up, and Charles Bruskowski of Arena. The first season of Compendium, which is an R&D tool from the Synthetic Ecologies Lab, has been curated by Angela Dimmayuga and is also led by Synthetic Ecologies Lab principal investigator Yasemin Sherry. Yasemin, I know you're watching this, so hello at home. Last time, Angela and Yasemin introduced us to the project, and we had a specific focus on cellular trompe l'oeil. This time around, I hope we'll be deep diving a little bit more into nonlinear temporalities. And these themes that I'm mentioning are, there's two more that we might talk around as well. These are stewards of knowledge and sensory intimacies. But the reason why we're focusing on nonlinear temporalities is because of Namita and Seetal, and I'm sure we'll get into more detail very shortly. But before I do that, I just have a bit of housekeeping. So with all our Twitch sessions, we have a live captioning link for those that need captions and access needs. My colleague Róisín will be dropping this into the chat, which leads me to my next point, in that we are all here today live in a studio in London, which is a treat. Normally we have remote speakers, but we're all here together. In the studio with me, I have associate producer, Arts Technologies, Róisín McVeigh. I've got our tech manager, Ralph Pritchard. Also have a special feature, Georgie from the Francis Crick Public Engagement team. Thank you for joining us, Georgie. And throughout the chat, throughout the event, my colleagues will be lurking in the chat. And I say this word lurking because we want you to get involved, and they'll be instigating conversation for you. Please send us questions. I'll be posing them to both Namita and Seetal, or maybe me if you've got one for me. But with that, I'd like us to segue back into the nonlinear temporalities element a little bit more. So as mentioned earlier in the year in July, when we kicked off the launch of Compendium, guest curator Angela Dimmayuga and Yasemin Sherry, they focused and unpacked cellular trompe l'oeil in detail. We continue this today, and as I continue to introduce Namita and Seetal, I wanted to very quickly read out to you a section from the Compendium website in regards to nonlinear temporalities. It speaks quite strongly to me, and I think it connects to both of you quite well, so I'm interested to hear your thoughts on it too. So with that, time can be seen as relational in cultures, communities, histories, life and death cycles, and intergenerational passing. Time is a resource in biology as it operates on many different paths and synchronizations. When it comes to fermentation, what do we learn from, and how can we imagine a plurality of time to reorientate ourselves? So who better to speak to this than both of you? I'd like for you to both introduce yourselves with this in mind, and maybe starting off with you, Seetal. And on that, I know you had provided me with some really interesting assets for me to introduce to the audience, and I thought I'd bring these ones up in regards to a fermentation lab.
Thank you. It's really exciting to be here talking about fermentation, actually. So I run a practice called Ma.tt.er, and I describe myself as a materials translator. And Ma.tt.er is basically a practice where we build relationships with materials. And how we do that is through consultancy, through design, and through different forms of educational tools. And so with that in mind, I would say like how we even work with materials is very much inspired by food. The food industry, or like food in general, I was always, the first kind of practice I was taught was how to cook at 5. And so even how to translate that into the materials world is very similar. So you know where things come from, how they're grown, how they're processed, and how they're kind of like disposed of in some way, shape or form. And I was fortunate enough to work in Lagos for just over a year and set up a fermentation lab with my friend Tushar at 16 by 16, and we opened up a space called Plan B. So with that in mind, we basically ran a fermentation lab which invited lots of other people to kind of be involved, but we only used native ingredients. So hibiscus flowers, pineapple, lemongrass, what else do we have? Moringa. So all of these different images that you see here are different flavors that we built. And ginger also, this is the mother, the SCOBY, which is very gooey and sticky, but we also worked with the leftovers actually and made different forms of like what I would say is kombucha leather. So that is the skin that's formed after everything's kind of been fermented. And once it's dried, it kind of behaves like a leather as well. So not only are you feeding people, but you're also making or providing kind of some drink substance to people, which is actually very healthy. You're also gaining a material. So that was all in essence of like providing different kind of experiences, which were not only culturally relevant, because fermentation in Nigeria is very like rooted in like their native culture, but also in my own. So it was like trying to cross the two together and make an experience that felt exciting and more contemporary.
Seetal, this might be a silly question because I was delivered this definition so many times throughout the project. Can you remind me what a SCOBY is?
Sure. It's basically, you're probably better at this than me, Namita. And basically it's the mother, it's all the bacteria that's formed in order for the fermentation to happen. So it's in the, it's like a disc that it kind of comes in mostly, or it's like this really gooey jelly-like substance. And what happens with the fermentation is like you add sugar in, and it basically, the bacteria eats the sugar, which kind of like activates. It's activated then and it like ferments. And normally with this kind of like fermentation with kombucha, it's tea that brings it to a really interesting flavor or some kind of flavor. And then you add all of these other ingredients if you like.
Thanks. Seetal, you also... fast forwarded a little bit.
No, you're good.
But you prepared some other key visuals for us to sort of describe the work that you do at Ma.tt.er. Can you expand on that for us a little bit?
Yeah, of course. I think this idea of translation and also how we apply what we do into industry and also institutions and through all of this work that we do is like applied research, essentially. I think this quote really sums up a lot of what our principles are, I think. So Philip Ross, who works at Microworks, he basically says there is not so much a crisis of materials, but of how we think about them, organize them, and use them. And I think that really succinctly puts that we aren't scarce of materials. We're not in this space of, we're going to run out of resources, which is what is the common conversation that is happening right now, because with this idea of talk of waste as a material, for me it is a material, so it will never be waste. So it's just how we describe them and even what the language is around these materials, and that's something that we have to reorganize, and that is a lot of the work that we're doing under our practice. And you can, go into the next one. And I think this is so fundamental to why we do what we do as well. George Monbiot, who's like a really prolific author and also journalist, mainly at The Guardian, an activist, I would say. He says, we are often told we are materialistic. It seems to me that we are not materialistic enough. We have a disrespect for materials. we use it quickly and carelessly. If we're genuinely materialistic people, we would understand where materials come from and where they go to. So simple, actually. And it's really about getting a wider audience to relate to materials. And if we're framing it in such a way where we're talking about care and respect, it offers another way in of like how to relate to materials. So like a lot of the work that we do is about building relationships. So we have a materials personality quiz and also a materials horoscope. And a lot of these tools are really playful and relatable and accessible, because I would say a lot of the material world is like within the sciences and also in academia, and that's not necessarily very accessible for the majority. And I really think that materials needs to be for everyone, because everything is made from something. We're always surrounded by materials, even when we're sleeping. So the consciousness or the awareness needs to be a bit more kind of like understood, but not in a way where it's preachy or telling off kind of thing. So the playful approach feels like more fitting for us.
It was definitely such a treat having you as part of the process, because you made it so playful for us. I mean, on a more serious note, this really resonates with me in terms of that life and death cycle. But also when you made us, and maybe you can explain it just in a little bit of detail. I know we don't have visuals for it, but it was lots of fun. But when we did that materials horoscope, it, for me personally, it made me recognize that I'm also a material.
Yeah, totally. I mean, you're more bacteria than anything, you know? So it's also realizing that a bone is material, skin is also, and it's even like getting you to see yourself through a materials lens is giving you the opportunity to see yourself outside of yourself. And actually that's really helpful. So almost it's less pressure to kind of be guided through that lens. And then, so yeah, what material were you again?
Pisces.
So, so it's perfect today. Bacterial cellulose. That's what you are.
Yeah. I mean, and I'm just going to go to the next visual, but also when we were working so closely with Angela and Yasemin, a really poignant element in regards, and I love it, how it's kind of not explicitly mentioned in the sub-themes. I think it comes out in nonlinear temporalities, but considering more than human perspectives, because I, from my own disciplinary background, kept seeing it as non-human, but even in that binary is probably not the most constructive way of approaching a field like fermentation, but through reconciling yourself as a part of that material landscape and ecosystem, it totally changes your perspective.
Completely. And I even think the term non-human is very othering, actually. Yeah. And we shouldn't really, that terminology really makes me feel a bit icky. So I do prefer more than human, but I still feel like there's work to do. And I'm not sure what it is just now, but I feel like there is a lot more work within the language sphere that we haven't really unpacked enough of yet. But that's, I mean, you can kind of see in this diagram a lot of, this is just a really quick snapshot of some of the industries we work within and like people we have to speak to. And really the material is the conduit. And that's why I describe myself as a translator rather than a designer, even though I've been trained as a designer, as a textiles designer to be more specific. And so by engaging with all of these different industries and I guess, I don't know, like places or spaces, we have to speak very different languages, but the material actually does a lot of that for us. And so what we end up doing is like working with maybe a single material, but apply it into many different industries. And so the application is the only thing that changes, but and also the process in which it has to go through. But the material is essentially something that is really guiding you as to what it can do and what it can't do. So, yeah.
And I love that production habit has its own circle here.
Yeah. It's so essential to
I
like
appreciate that.
practice.
But you also had this one.
Yeah, you can just leave it on this one actually, and I'll just explain it quite quickly, I would say, because I'm taking a lot of time. But I've basically created a methodology, which is kind of like attributing to some like a 12-step program like the AA. So where it's taking that principle and also like different principles in lots of different philosophies of the number 12. So numerology is kind of like underpinning everything here. But I would say it's basically trying to get us to not be addicted to consumption. So these are the 12 steps that we go through with different projects or people, and also with, it's kind of a bit of a curriculum. So what we're doing is like building lots of tools to like help people relate to the material world again. And so we start there, and that is kind of the materials personality quiz and also the horoscope and all sorts of other things to get you to see yourself through a material, which then allows you to understand the immaterial world and then the virtual world. And then you have to really understand it through a personal point of view, which then helps you understand what your role is. And then once you understand your role, you then understand what your role is within a community, and then that community's role towards the planet. And then that helps you shift mindsets, behaviors, and then systems, which are mechanisms, which then helps you build like different dimensions, which I think is time, and spectrums, which I think is scale, and then landscapes, which is multiple futures, or alternative futures. So it's very much about the plural and like building alternative worlds and giving people the opportunity to imagine, discover, explore, and be themselves, really.
Seetal, we've got a quick shout out from the chat.
Okay.
Godwin from Plan B, Laos is greeting you, Seetal. We miss you.
Oh, that's very sweet.
Namita, switching to you, you were our resident scientist as part of Compendium. How would you describe, I mean, there's so much more than just fermentation scientist, and you went on, I feel like, this discovery path, and it was really, I was really happy that you could be involved, because, I mean, myself, having previously worked at the Crick, it's like we could grow this ecosystem and tear down some of those silos of knowledge that often people get caught up in. But I'm talking too much. How would you describe yourself, not only within the project, but also professionally?
Well, first, thank you, Alex. Happy to be here. So I'm a fermentation scientist. I work for the Francis Crick Institute. For people who don't know who Francis Crick was, he, along with James Watson and Rosalind Franklin, discovered the helical structure of DNA. And this is what this biomedical research institute is named after. I work for I'm part of the Structural Biology SDP, and that's a science technology platform. And it's basically a research service for any of the research scientists in the Crick. So within structural biology, I work in fermentation, and I work with fermenters or bioreactors. And the purpose of these bioreactors are to grow up big batches, up to 100 litres of yeast and E. coli. The reason that the research scientists want this is they are looking into different proteins. So some of the research is based on chromosome replication. They're looking into chromosome replication, chromosome segregation, DNA damage. It's mostly around cancer. So that's what all of our 11 labs that we work for is all around, cancer research. Basically this is showing some of the other STPs in the Crick. This is our glass wash department, and they work just next door to us. Do you have any of the day in the life ones? So I usually people, when I say I'm a fermentation scientist, they don't really know what it is that I do. So any opportunity that I get, I do try and take in any of my friends or other colleagues down to the fermentation lab, just to show them what I do. And so I took some day in the life videos to give you kind of an insight into what we do. So first of all, we use yeast as a model because basically a lot of their cellular pathways are similar to the human ones. So yeast is a great model for that. So this is our lab there. This is Frank Orman, one of our. He's a huge user of the department. He grows. I think he's grown upwards of 10,000 litres of yeast over the past 10 years, I think it is, which is, that's a super user. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of like when I explain the Crick to friends or colleagues, it's kind of like this super spaceship that's trying to push society forward through biomedical knowledge and research, which for us at Serpentine Galleries and the Arts Technologies team in particular, we're trying to do the same thing but with art and technology. So I felt like it was a perfect match having you come on board and being able to, I guess it's helpful to also contextualize that the Crick is so big that it has its own public engagement strand to really help translate and give access to science. So on the practical level, there was like this unison of production similarities that I knew would work. But when I was also introducing Yasemin to the Crick, because we got to go, I remember taking her down to Europe.
Yeah.
She loved it. There was also more like this broader metaphor to the work that's being done at Crick and Compendium. Because for Compendium, when we were building it, it's really about breaking down those silos of knowledge, giving access to it, and trying to exemplify it across different discipline. I knew I was going to misenunciate something. Disciplinary vernaculars. But on this, Namita, I was going to, before we go into some of the blocks, because you've got all these brilliant behind-the-scenes ones, I'm going to refresh the page because I need to do a shout out to Somnath Bhatt, who's helped us create this animated asset that comes up. And you may be familiar with it because it's in the background of our Twitch. It's via our social media. Thank you so much, Somnath, for contributing to the project. It's given Compendium such a strong personality that I felt all the guild members really resonated with as well. And then in regards to the website design, Mindy Sue worked with us really closely, also an incredibly thoughtful and multidisciplinary person. And Brian Hiddleston, who's created this font. So, I mean, I always point this out to people when they visit Compendium, but there's this font that sort of degradates as you explore the page. I'll refresh it again. All becomes animated once you refresh the pages, but it's kind of like microbes growing as well. But let me try and find some of your... Scroll down. We've also got... We've revamped some of our search function too. So for those of you searching at home, you can filter and search. So I've highlighted Namita's name, and if I put day in the... Will take a little bit to load. But it was great that you were, when we were doing this, Namita, I'm really happy that you decided to sort of capture that part of the Crick that often isn't. Hang on, let me try and search.
Yeah, it was mostly because whenever I do tell people what I do, people only understand fermentation as maybe in bread or in beer. But when I go into like the precision fermentation, which is what we do, and it was uses microorganisms like yeast and bacteria, they don't quite understand what else we do. I mean, probably the most famous precision fermentation is creating, or rather using, microbes to produce insulin. And so that's something that is used. So a lot of enzymes and hormones are produced using precision fermentation. So what we're doing is actually for first stage basic research into cancer research. So the proteins that we express is actually to look into why does DNA damage occur, or what happens during chromosome replication, and how can that be? Yeah. So this is a tour of our lab. This is actually the fermentation lab on LB4. We have 5 stainless steel steam in place fermenters. So they're all hooked up to an air supply, steam, water, all the good stuff.
Plus, I mean, I know it may not be the most appropriate, but I remember, I mean, I've been down there so many times for when I worked at the Crick, but taking someone like Yasemin for the first time, seeing someone who's so creatively inclined approach these apparatuses, like the magic that went on in her eyes, she finds them so beautiful.
Yeah, I think we had a culture growing at the time, and we had the little view windows, and she could see it all kind of bubbling inside, and she was very excited about that.
Because you guys are almost like these curators of not only the vessels but the microbes there. I remember there was a story that you told us, and maybe you can expand again, but in regards to when you guys go on a holiday or leave.
Yeah, so I think this was during one of our brainstorming jam sessions. I think, Seetal, you were talking about how materials are, I think, alive, or yeah, and it just made me think how so I work with Ali Doost, and I have worked with him for over 15 years now, and Ravina, who's just joined the team. And whenever we would go away on holiday, so it was always during the summertime, something would go wrong with them. And we would always be like, oh, it's because they know you're going on holiday, so they're going to be missing one of us. And so we're giving them kind of human characteristics. And and we were talking about how it all came down to this concept of, I guess, care and attachment. And we always make that little joke.
Yeah, I think you ultimately end up becoming caretakers for the materials in some way, or a guardian. And I think, if anything, if that's the role that we take on as a human for the material world, which is also a living world, then I think we're in a really good place, actually. And I think, especially with bacteria, when it is living and breathing and you see it die, it's quite painful, actually, to know that you've cared for something for so long, and then all of a sudden its life ends, and then you're like, oh, what did I do wrong? Or like, could I do something better? You know, but also I do think that we are also afraid of materials not lasting a long time. So I think we also have to take on the role of knowing that the materials perhaps won't outlive us. And I think it's important to know that all of these materials have their own lifespans. The idea of non-linear temporalities, which is what we're discussing in this conversation, I think really applies to the material world so well, because we're assuming that material should be really long-lasting and durable and it has longevity, but actually maybe it's less harmful if it doesn't, because then nobody's really accountable for those materials once we're not around. So things like fermentation and bacteria, their lifespan is much shorter than something like plastic, for example.
Yeah, they are. I mean, so when we were talking about this concept of non-linear temporalities, it really made me think about the fact that these little yeast and bacteria have a completely different life. Like their lifetime in our vessels are only 3 days. So they go from like living, what I see is like living a whole life from like a Monday to a Wednesday. And then that's over for them. But I was also, I think I started looking into, just the lifespan of yeast and how they were actually using yeast as a model for human aging as well, which I found super interesting. So I also put a block up on. That's what I loved about taking part in this compendium, is that it gave me a chance to do reading and research into topics I wouldn't normally look into. So that's why I'm very grateful that you asked me to take part in this. It's opened my eyes to so many different
I was
topics.
going to say, Namita, maybe it's a good time to also bring up some of the props that you brought along today, because it was in relation. It was in relation to yeast, and I'm glad you did, and then I'm glad you didn't tell me. It's a wonderful surprise.
So I brought in little. They're called giant microbes. So this is an E. coli. Seetal's holding a dead COVID. And Alex is holding a little yeast.
So cute.
Yeah, they're quite cute.
And the one that's in the background.
Yeah. Oh yeah,
and the one here. Yeah. So the one that started it all. So actually you were just talking about feeling bad for when they died. So the first time, and I think we've been working with these, I've been working in fermentation for 10 years. And then one day we just walked in and there was no bacteria in the reactors at all. So we should see a nice kind of milky broth. And it was completely clear. And we were like, oh my gosh, what's happened? We didn't know what happened at all. And after much research and talking to lots of different people, we found out that this little guy here, which is known as a bacteriophage, is a little virus that infects E. coli. Now, phage is 10 times smaller than this. So they actually latch onto the bacteria like this, inject the DNA into the E. coli. They start replicating like crazy, and the little E. coli cell dies and just bursts open. That was just... Yeah, I remember the first time that happened. I felt quite sad.
Yeah. I mean, it kind of veers off into one of the other sub-themes, Namita, the stewards of knowledge. Can you speak a little bit more? Because it's one of the key stories that I remember from participating in Compendium.
So we were talking about oral histories, and with the whole bacteriophage, we see it as a contamination. We couldn't find any papers on it or anything really online that we could use against this phage, and in a pilot plant setting with stainless steel fermenters. Because if you're just on the bench and you have like a glass flask, you can throw that away, but you just can't do that with our fermenters. So and lots of different chemicals just don't work on the stainless steel. It can corrode it and just damage the whole the machines. So funnily enough, we then had to speak to other people who then were saying, oh yeah, this is probably what it is. You can talk to this and this lab. And so it really kind of made me feel that it was more of an oral history of how to deal with this phage contamination, because nothing was really written down. But it definitely expanded our network of contacts, because now we became mini experts in phage contamination.
So, another good metaphor for Compendium. I just very quickly had a question from Bettina Korek, who's the CEO of Serpentine. She wants to know where we get the plushies.
So I actually got these from Amazon, and there's a site called Giant Microbes, which do all of these as well.
It's such a playful way of explaining fermentation, which is really important. On that, Seetal, you had this quote by none other than Bjork.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to bring it up because it's great. And I would love you to speak to it.
Yeah, gladly.
When it loads.
It's something that I found on Twitter, on her Twitter, I think, quite a while ago, and it's really stuck with me. And again, it really speaks to language. And yeah, well, let's let it load. But she's everything, this woman. I'm so inspired by her and her unapologetic nature, just to be herself.
Let me try. Oh, here we go. I was just searching the wrong thing.
Nice. So she says the word nature and the word techno mean the same thing. Depends if you look at it from the past or from the future. For example, a little cabin in the mountains, an ape thinks it's techno. It is the future. But for us, it has to become nature. We must live with both.
Mm-hmm.
It is very important. We can't be just nature or just techno. This really hits so many things in my body. And again, it really speaks to this idea of what tech or techno is in our world today. And a lot of the assumption is that it's digital. And actually, technology also comes from nature. And I think, mycelium is a really great example of what technology in nature can actually offer, because it's described as the nature's world wide web of sorts, because it's the greatest communicator to all other living beings. It knows and it can identify when a plant or a living tree is in need of nurturing. So then it feeds each other, it's communicating, and then it nourishes it. So that's technology in essence.
Mm-hmm.
And it's coming from nature, and so much of what we have in our worlds now, and like even being on Twitch, I think it's really come from those spaces of like learning how nature actually works, and somehow that becomes futuristic of sorts and feels like it then is described as techno or tech. So I think both of them, for me, they have to coexist. And I think that's exactly what she's describing here, which I think is so beautifully put.
I showed it to the rest of the arts technologies team because, not to toot the arts tech horn, but within Serpentine, some of our other pillars are ecology. And a huge reason as to why we say arts technologies is because of that multiplicity. Mm-hmm. And then, when we think about technology, I think too often it's controlled, or that vernacular is disempowering to a lot of people. And so what I really loved having you as part of the project was like me re-articulating my relationship to how we name things as well. I'm going to bring up another element that you have, another grid that you created for us in regards to nouns are for experts, verbs are for everyone. Because again, it stuck in my head. Here we go.
Yeah. So this came from a book called Goods as Services, which Lou Down wrote a couple of years ago now. And this really stuck with me also. So I think there's a conversation around naming or labeling things or each other. And somehow naming myself a designer felt like I was like stuck or like fixed in one position somehow, or not being able to like maneuver or pivot so easily, or it felt like it was being told what I should be doing, basically. And this is what a designer looks like, this is the classification, this is how it's being categorized. But actually, when I describe myself as a translator and it feels more descriptive, or adding process to the description of like what I do, it feels so much more fluid and open, non-binary even, and then we feel like we are able to be a bit freer in terms of what we can offer and who we can work with. It feels like it's more participatory. It feels more inviting also. And maybe the block with all the verbs that I wrote down for fermentation could help like describe that even further, actually.
Verbing with fermentation?
I think so.
Let's have a look.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So I just literally wrote a list of words that describe fermentation: simmering, brewing, tempering, fermenting, bubbling, raging, stirring, all sorts of like very kind of like process-led words, which actually feel more visceral somehow, and you can somehow capture a visual with it as well. I'm quite a visual person, so like having these words in front of me feel like, oh yeah, I understand what action it takes to like make something fermented, and it feels a bit more relatable somehow. And
Yeah. I mean, and
yeah, go ahead.
This is not related to a block, Seetal, but I remember you also, where is it? Is it Beauty Futures? What you were just explaining again.
Yeah, I mean, all of those words really fit into the visuals of this, actually. Smart move, I like it. Yeah, so this is a video we made for the Future Laboratory to describe the beauty industry and what it's kind of having to face as we have a lot more toxins, pollution and stress in our lives. And so we created all these beautiful like moving images and all these different processes which were really basic. It's like GCSE again. So it's milk, very liquid, and paint. And so all of those initial visuals that you saw kind of give you the impression that there's something in motion or something that needs to be addressed or attacked or, you know, resolved somehow. And yeah, we just use lots of different materials, which kind of gives you the impression that it's having to do something or make some kind of change. And yeah, it was just really fun. Again, it's about this expression of how materials behave and how they can be translated into telling stories also. And yeah, this is essentially a really visual representation of some of the words even.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Feel free to interject.
I was just thinking about you saying about giving yourself the label of designer, and I think that's what I very much feel about the label of scientist as well, because I also very much relate to being a technician and also an engineer, so I don't really see myself as just one thing, but then there's this whole hierarchy, especially within science, of technicians versus scientists versus engineers. But this is what I really love about the Crick, is that they did highlight all the technicians in their craft and graft exhibition, and they really tried to champion them, I suppose. I mean, they did put a lot of us in the basement, but that's here nor there. But yeah, I mean, it's I don't really know why it's there, but when someone says, "Oh, I'm a scientist," everyone's like, "Ooh, oh, you must do this and this and wear the white coat." Whereas a technician is also the same level of skill, expertise, a lot of the time the same education. So I'm not really sure why there is that difference, really. But again, it's all down to hierarchy. But yeah, I do like what the Crick is doing about highlighting the fact that a lot of this great research couldn't be done with so many technicians that are housed at the Crick as well.
And just giving a bit of multiplicity to the general public in terms of understanding their position within science, which is it's what we try to do within Compendium too. I have a rather selfish question to ask both of you in regard, because we've talked about process, and I think it goes in hand with temporalities. But we work so closely with Angela and also Cab from Arena. I need to shout out to Cab because he's an incredibly patient person, because we really wanted to sort of recognize that there are hierarchies in this field, but we didn't want to implement that into the Compendium. Did you both feel empowered to explore your own disciplinary perspectives? I don't know, maybe you can explain, because a lot of the back-end processes that we use to sort of generate how the content is plugged into Compendium itself are a little bit invisible, but for us, what is really important about this process is that R&D structure of the learnings and the networking and the guild that's made out of it. I think it's a little bit misleading sometimes that we always focus on the output.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to hear a little bit more from both of you, how you found that experience, if there's anything that you would have changed, or if there's anything that we could improve on.
No, I mean, I always felt heard. And I mean, it was a great bunch of very talented individuals. And it was a lot of fun. Every time we had our sessions, our brainstorming, jamming sessions, it was very fun. I think we spent nearly an hour talking just about MSG production.
Oh, yeah.
That was a fun one. That was a fun one. But no, I mean, I felt it gave me, to use your word, empowered me to look into areas I'd never looked into before. So I think Angela was looking up ancient practices of winemaking, and it made me start reading myself about these things, and Lucy with the leafcutter ants. I just started reading anything and everything. It didn't make me think that I only needed to stick to precision fermentation or anything related to that. I definitely felt empowered to do research anything and everything.
I really thought it was such an open and safe space to feel like I was at school again. No, I say that in the really genuine way. Like, it's in the most complimentary way, even, because I was learning so much, and I think I've taken away and still taking away, because it's something that I feel is like ongoing. It's so evolutionary, this whole process of like how we can learn from one another, and how that is very it's the only way to like build something together, or to make change, should I say, even. And I think it does start with conversation, and I think it goes back to the idea of oral histories being something that is really important, and has been, in terms of like how we relate to one another, and this space offered the opportunity to really be heard and be seen also. And I think that's all we ever want as humans, is that. And it didn't feel intimidating, even though there's so many, everyone's so talented in their own way and space. And I never felt intimidated to share my opinion on something, even if I disagreed. So it's, props to you guys. And it was really great to be involved, and still great to be involved.
Yeah.
I'm glad you felt held, because the research process is incredibly important. And we tried to make it fun as well. I'm playing that MSG video that you created a block with Namita, because for me, I remember when you introduced it to the group, it was very visually led, because everyone within the guild too likes to learn at their own, at their own temporality. I'm more of a visual person. I've always found entering science, in particular biomedical science, having worked at the Crick, to at first be quite challenging, but having you all there to also lead me through the process too. I mean, as a producer, there's always going to be friction points, because I was like, we got to get to the next stage. When are we doing the thing? But you guys made it really fun for everybody. We've got about 10 minutes left, so I was going to open it up to questions. I know Róisín's been sort of capturing some along the way, so I'll let Róisín feed me through via my handy phone here. But one coming now. Just to also say, if anybody is interested in sort of the broader framework, I think it's really important to highlight on Compendium. You can go back to this read more, and it kind of gives the full curatorial statement and how these sub-themes all articulate all the things that we're talking about. And again, notebook of conversation, etc. So question from Róisín that's come from the chat, and this is a big one, so feel free to answer it as you will. How can we further break down boundaries between disciplines?
I mean, this is a great start, what we're doing. I mean, well, the Crick is a good example because they have their public engagement department and team, and they make all efforts. I think one of the visions of the Crick was also not only to give back to the community, but also make people more aware of what's going on, which is why they chose this central location as well. So I think what the Crick is doing is actually a very good role model of what other institutes could also be doing. We have the Meet the Scientist days. We have all of our in the Manby Gallery, all the exhibits that they do there, all for the public. So yeah.
I'll let you answer as well, Seetal, but just quickly, if anybody has any questions in regards to the Crick, please get in touch with us, because I can also forward you through to the correct communication channels, because the Crick's been a very important partner for Compendium thus far. Shout out to the Crick, and also to Hannah Delphistine for organising the brilliant behind-the-scenes tours with Yasmin Sherry. But Seetal?
It's a big question. And how I will begin responding to it is by saying that we need bridge builders, basically. And so there's many more of them forming, and I think they're coming not from an individualistic point of view. It's also coming from a cohort or a collective or a community. And I think that space is where we can actually break the boundaries between disciplines by having different voices and like multiple perspectives. You know, in this guild, we have a chef, we have a scientist, we have a translator, we have so many, sorry, I'm really bad at naming everybody's like role, but so many voices to offer a much more holistic perspective as to like what the needs are to be addressed. And I think that's where we need to begin. What do we need to change? Who is it for? And why do we need it? And so for me, there are like those three are the fundamental questions, and like depending on who we're speaking to and who the audience is, we need to then bring in the right people to like build those bridges in order for that to happen. So that's really what we do at Ma.tt.er even. So, and it's through material. So that's kind of like what the change, those kinds of conversations can kind of like come up with, basically.
And it really fits within the broader direction of Synthetic Ecologies Lab that Yas is leading as well, and she's sort of the curator of contributors in regards to, like, Angela was very much the curator of the creative direction and content, but Yas was really careful to make sure that we had the right bridge builders. Otherwise we couldn't engineer what we needed to engineer. But the next question, this is kind of specific to collaboration, but how do you kick off when working with new collaborators, especially those from different disciplines? Do you have any strategies for icebreakers or knowledge sharing?
Yes. The quiz.
The materials horoscope.
Yeah, all of these things make life a lot easier to like get to know one another, because I will do it with them also, and it's just fun also, and you get to know their personalities, but also some of their processes that they want to maybe take, and then it's a catalyst to therefore write a brief as well with them. So I always make sure that the brief is with, not for only. So I think these little tools may sound like fun and it's just fun, but actually it's so thoroughly researched in so many scientific methods, as well as like I'm going to be really trash here. So like basic. I was really inspired by like Just 17 magazine as a kid. So, you know, you'd go through these little like tests. Oh, like, what's your ideal boyfriend? And then you end up like with this like summary of like what he may be, you know, his personality traits and this kind of thing. And then obviously at the end you'll have like horoscopes and this kind of thing. So like just these magazines or like even newspapers that we read daily are such a great kind of way in because people are familiar with it. So it's taking something that's unfamiliar to be familiar. And so like collaboration is like really a way to kind of like, again, it's like, what is that little pull? What is going to capture your attention, but also get to know each other and what we want.
Cab called them the cookie crumbs.
Breadcrumbs.
The breadcrumbs. The breadcrumbs.
Yeah.
But how about for you, Namita? I mean, you have to collaborate with so many people at the Crick, right?
Yeah. So the unique thing about the Crick is that on each floor there's actually like 4 quadrants. So they're like neighborhoods, and I think they've purposefully put different like research areas on those floors, because then we have the collaboration areas that people, you have to go there to make coffee or something, and then you'll just end up talking to someone there, and they just may have, I don't know, heard something about something else that that kind of
you might discover DNA
is is useful to your research, or someone who, so it's great for networking. The other thing, so that's what they do within the Crick. But the other thing I love that the Crick does is the discovery days. And I'm pretty sure, so I've been to a couple now, and you don't need a kid to go along, really. I've taken a few friends.
No, it's for everyone.
Exactly, it's for everyone, because it's so accessible. Like everything they have there is, it just makes it easier, because it's all, I guess, things like this, where people and then they just ask about the little, you know, what is this and how does it relate to what? And I've had a few people who've just come up and said, oh, I'm doing this and this. Do you know anything anyone who'd be interested in this? And yeah, maybe you don't know, or you do, but you know someone who can you can pass it on to try and find out. So I found those days super helpful as well, just to kind of facilitate some collaboration.
Very process-led.
Yeah.
I remember one of our early jams to sort of start the process of compendium theme and content building. Also, Angela de Mayuga is like the ultimate bridge builder between all the contributors. But one of the early ones was that deities.
Yeah.
And I know Chiara also informed that too, but I found that really like, wow, okay, you could come at it in whatever abstract way that you want to. But I found that really helpful as an icebreaker because it was related to the content, but it was adjacent enough that you could kind of find your own way into it. I mean, for me, I think I was looking up, I play a lot of World of Warcraft, and there was that character that was derived from fermentation and how they sort of existed within their ecosystem as like a stewards of knowledge. I think Róisín has one more question for me. Oh, for us, not me, because we've only got about a minute left. But do you have any favorite writers, thinkers, artists, scientists in regards to fermentation that you could recommend for people wanting to further their own fermentation journey?
You begin. Go ahead.
Oh no, I was looking at you because I went blank. I knew you'd have a lot.
I have a few.
Yeah.
David Zilber.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
And he co-wrote a book with about Noma fermentation, which I think is really, really brilliantly written. And Sandor Katz, The Art of Fermentation, and he's even written a book called Fermentation as Metaphor. It's excellent. God, there's many more. And just specifically about fermentation, okay.
Yeah.
You go ahead. I'll think more.
I'm very boring. The fermentation books I have is all from when I went to university. So they were like big textbooks, like to do with. I think I have one of the bioprocessing ones up there. I can't remember
on Compendium.
Yeah.
Maybe I can get the titles of some and then communicate it to everyone.
For sure. Yeah.
I was going to say on this, we've got an article coming out on Serpentine Art and Ideas by Claire Evans, and she kind of maps out some key landscape fermentation people from across a variety of disciplines. So be sure to keep checking that. We'll publicize that when we post-produce this Twitch. But I just wanted to say thank you both for joining us, and for everyone at home, and to Georgie, and to Róisín and Ralph. But that's all we've got time for. We'll have more in the coming months with other guild members, so we hope to see you then. Thank you.
Thank you.